and open your camera and have a seat. So good to see everybody here today. Come on in. Welcome. We have thousands who have registered for this event today. So delighted to have you here with us. Come on in. Come on in. Let me put myself on the spotlight as we're getting a bit busier here. Welcome. My name is Carrie Cardinelli with MEA. So delighted to welcome you to this Fireside Chat. In a minute, I'll be bringing up the founder of MEA, Chip Conley, and our special guest for today, Gretchen Rubin. We're thrilled. This is going to be a really fun and power-packed conversation, and we're so happy that you are here. We have folks joining us from all over the world. So pop in the chat, where are you in the world right now? Let's see. Let's just get a little geographical waterfall of where everybody is from all over the world. Feel free to use the chat to post questions if you like. Chip and Gretchen will be chatting together for about 30 or 40 minutes or so, and then we will be taking some questions. So you can get ready for that section. We'll have some of you come up on stage. You can do that by raising your hand, but not yet, but when we tell you to. And you can also put your questions in the chat. Look at that. All over the world is here today. Oh my gosh. Welcome. Some of you may be here for your very first time. Is this your very first live event with MEA? Raise your hand so I can see you. Welcome. Yay. It's kind of like a little fun workshop and a party all at once. So without further ado, let me bring up Chip Conley. So happy to have you here with us today. And thank you for doing these fireside chats. I just want to start with that. It's such a great vehicle for bringing up some of these amazing thought leaders and sharing, kind of a modern wisdom school in real time for all of us. And we're just really grateful that you've put this together.
Well, listen, what an honor it is. First of all, Carrie, we all love you. You have so much to do and a team that supports you. We couldn't do this without you. Secondly, what an honor, to be at this stage in my life, being able to bring in people I really admire, learn from them. As we say at MEA, wisdom is not taught, it's shared. So how do we bring people to the community that has developed, this movement that's developed around MEA, to share their wisdom? And as Gretchen will learn today, she's going to be not just teaching, she's going to be learning at the same time, because that is what a modern elder does. They are as curious as they are wise. So I'll let you introduce Gretchen.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, how excited am I? I've been a Gretchen Rubin fan for decades. So I'm so excited that she's here. Gretchen is one of today's most influential and thought-provoking observers of happiness and human nature. She's a highly acclaimed writer, and she has this ability to convey things with such levity and like common sense, just, storytelling. She has millions of copies of her New York Times bestselling books sold, more than 220 million downloads of her Happier with Gretchen Rubin podcast, which breaks my brain. And she has a brand new book, super excited about, called Life in 5 Senses, that's available now. And she's going to share later in the call today about a really cool neglected sense quiz. She's been interviewed by Oprah. She's had dinner with Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman. She's walked arm in arm with the Dalai Lama. She's been everywhere. She's even been an answer on Jeopardy, which I guess really means you've made it. Because if you are an answer on Jeopardy, that means you have made it all the way to the top of the mountain. And so with that, I'm going to let you two take over the stage. Thank you very much, Chip and Gretchen, for being here.
Well, Gretchen, first of all, Carrie, thank you. Gretchen, so good to be with you. We were talking before we got on, before we came online with everybody else, about the fact that you're from Kansas City. And for those of you who are Ted Lasso fans, this is the day to, the final episode of Ted Lasso's today. And it's all about homecoming. So we won't go any further. No spoiler alert here. We're going to leave it at that. But what's a girl from Kansas City doing in a place like Manhattan? You've come a long way, my dear.
I have, yeah. I love Kansas City, but I love New York City too. Yep.
Yeah. So one of the things I just really admire about you is how you have you had the Happiness Project, and this is sort of like the sensory project. And there's an element of you looking at the human condition having a curiosity about it, and then being the specimen, the person who's going to go into the lab of trying to learn a particular topic, with your warts and all, and the challenges and the upsides, and then coming out of that with practical advice. So how would you distill down your superpower talent around how you write and why people gravitate to you so much because of your writing and your perspective?
Well, you're exactly right. I think that my larger topic is human nature. That's sort of the big umbrella of what I'm interested in, and particularly happiness. And and that's a extremely broad subject, and it contains so many things within it. But I think maybe what distinguishes my approach is I'm always trying ideas for myself. And I don't know about you, but I think it's very good to give good advice to other people. It's really easy to tell other people what they should do, but then when you try to take that advice, it often doesn't go the way you expect. Or when you like do a bunch of research, but then you try things out yourself, it doesn't always work out the way you anticipate. And so I find that I get just like incredibly curious with things. I've got all kinds of kind of mini research projects running in the background. And I get really interested in it. And then when I try to put them into work, often then I find out what works for me, or often I find out something that's a little bit different from what I expected to find out. And so I think sometimes people they see in my work maybe things that they haven't seen elsewhere, or there's sort of a nuance to it that that maybe they identify like me, or maybe they identify as the opposite of me or different from me, but there's something about it. And also I think a lot of times there are abstract ideas that we agree with in principle, but we're sort of thinking, yeah, but then what would that mean for me, like tomorrow morning, if I don't want to spend a lot of time, energy, or money, what would I do with this? And so I sort of think about that. And as you said, we can all learn from each other. So I'm constantly asking other people, well, what do you do about it? How do you approach it? What strategies, tips, hacks, approaches have worked for you? And try to distill that all for people.
And let's go back to the Happiness Project, because that was one of the many reasons you became well known and a Jeopardy answer.
Yeah.
So if you were to distill down all of that learning you had from the Happiness Project to a paragraph, what advice or wisdom would you offer those of us on the call around the subject of happiness?
Well, the first thing I would say is there is no magic one size fits all answer. Nobody can tell you the best way or the right way, because we're really different from each other, and something that works really well for me might not work for you, and vice versa. So we all sort of have to have our own happiness projects. Given that, if you said to me, well, what's the most important thing, or like, what's the secret to happiness? I would say the first one is relationships. I know you talk about this all the time, Chip, that in the end, it's our relationships to other people. So anything that broadens or deepens our relationships is something that's likely to make us happier. And then also back to self-knowledge, that we really have to start with ourselves, and to know ourselves is the great challenge of our life. And that's something as simple as, am I a morning person or a night person? Because if you're a night person and somebody tells you something's important to you, get up and do it first thing in the morning, it's like, well, that's probably not going to work for you. Not because it's not good advice, but because you're a night person. Something as simple as that. And then there are all sorts of ways that understanding ourselves can help us figure out how to create a life that achieves our aims in the way that's right for us.
Beautiful. So how do you customize it for yourself based upon your self-knowledge? And a happiness role model for me is Matthew Ricard. If you're familiar with Matthew Ricard,
sure.
He came and taught at MEA last spring.
I never knew how to pronounce his first name. Do you just say
Matthew?
Okay.
Well,
Matthew. I didn't. Okay, good.
Matthew Ricard.
Matthew.
So for those who don't know him, he's considered to be the happiest person, on earth, because he's a well-known Buddhist monk who was a neuroscientist or a brain scientist, and they studied his brain on meditation. But you've had time with the Dalai Lama, and who are some of your happiness role models, and including the Dalai Lama, and what can we learn from them?
That's interesting. For my role models, I don't think I've thought of them as happiness role models, partly because we can't know someone else's happiness. And it's, it's one of those things where it's like, you can be happy and sad at the same time. You can have a happy life that's not necessarily making you happy. Like happiness doesn't always make us feel happy, which is sort of paradoxical. But if I think about my role models, I mean, I have role models. My spiritual teacher is Saint Therese of Lisieux, even though I'm not even Catholic. Benjamin Franklin, Dolly Parton, Winston Churchill. I wrote a biography of Winston Churchill. Julia Child. I got a million.
So Gretchen, with the ones you just mentioned, what's an adjective that describes each of them? What's the adjective that sort of like most pops up for you when you think of Julia Child?
Enthusiasm.
Okay. Winston Churchill.
Certainty.
Saint Teresa of Avila.
Saint Therese of Lisieux, little. Which anybody, if there are any Saint Therese fans out there, you know why I say little.
Okay, interesting. Who else did you say? You said Dolly Parton.
Benjamin Franklin, practical.
Okay.
Dolly Parton. Again, it's the certainty. It's just the, maybe certainty isn't the right word for both of them. It's more like
Ben Franklin's wisdom. That's what there's a wisdom to him.
Well, to me, it's the practical. Benjamin Franklin, for all of those who are kind of the practical way, Benjamin Franklin, he's like, I got a list of 13. I'm doing it in the morning. Like he's very much like really trying to be very concrete. Yes, everybody should read the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. Such a wonderful book. Yeah, very wise for sure. Poor Richard for sure. Yeah. Yep.
So at the start of this year, you said 23 minutes of walking per day. That will make you happier and
go outside.
Go outside. So talk about this. This was a great way to sort of be a precursor to your book coming out, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But talk a little bit about what I call spying on the divine, being in nature and finding awe in nature. What have you found during your daily walks, and is this something you weren't doing before?
Yeah, so this is something that we've done on the Happier podcast. Is for the last several years, we've done an annual challenge. So we had walk 20 and 20, read 21 and 21, rest 22 and 22, and then go outside 23 and 23. So the idea is like you would do something for 23 minutes in 2023. Just as kind of like a fun way to play with the number.
Got it.
Yeah. So go outside. Well, one of the things that I hadn't realized, and sometimes you don't even kind of notice your own life, which is baffling to me. But that's why I wrote a book like Life in 5 Senses. Is I always thought of myself as a New Yorker being in a very urban setting, but I realized I actually spend a lot of time outside, maybe more than some people who live in the suburbs, because if I'm going to the drugstore, I'm walking 8 blocks. If I'm walking, I'm walking 6 blocks to go to the subway. Whereas people in the suburbs were like, oh, I just jump in my car, drive somewhere, park, So I was already spending a lot more time outside than I realized, but I wasn't making the most of it. I wasn't thinking, oh, this is time outside. Let me look at the sky. Let me watch the patterns of the birds between the buildings. And then I'm so incredibly fortunate. I live very near Central Park. And so I really made sure to get my time in Central Park, which is so beautiful. And so has so many different little mini landscapes within it. So I'm very fortunate.
What are your 3 favorite spots in Central Park?
Ooh, Bethesda Fountain. I love Bethesda Fountain. I love Conservatory Garden. Gosh, the boat pond is so beautiful. And that's where Stuart Little was in his boat, if you know your E.B. White. Those are probably my 3 favorites. Yeah.
Beautiful. Oops, get rid of that. Sorry. And someone just said Belvedere Castle, Strawberry Fields.
Oh, I love Belvedere Castle. Yes, right. Yep. I walked past it on my walk. Yep.
So we've just learned there's not a top 3 list, there's a top 10 list.
Oh yeah.
For sure. So let's talk a little bit more about what led you to writing your new book, Life in 5 Senses, and we're big fans at MEA of Dacher Keltner's work, the UC Berkeley professor who lives within walking distance of the MEA campus and teaches there once a year. His next workshop is in December. Well, you know, when the world's leading expert on awe lives in your neighborhood, that you're living in the right place. Talk about how what was it that led you? I know I had something to do, I think, with your eyesight, maybe, that led you to starting to ask this question about your five senses.
Yeah, it was a very ordinary moment of my life. I had a bad case of pink eye, so I had to go to the eye doctor. And as I was getting ready to leave, he said to me in a very casual way, like, wear enough sunscreen or, drink enough water. He said, well, come back for your regular checkup because, as you know, you're at more risk of losing your vision. And I said, what? No, I don't know that. What are you talking about? And he said, oh, yeah, you're extremely nearsighted. That means you're more at risk for having a detached retina. And if that happens, it could affect your vision. So we would want to catch it right away. And I have a friend who at that time had just lost some of his vision to a detached retina. So that felt like a very real possibility to me. So I walked out onto the street and I'm looking around and realizing, how precious this like cityscape was to me. And, often we don't realize how much we value something till we lose it or we fear we might lose it. And I was thinking, all of this is around me. And I didn't notice one thing on my way over here. I was so stuck in my head. I was in this fog of preoccupation. I didn't notice one thing as I was walking over here. And now I'm thinking, oh, this is so important to me. And at that moment, it was like every knob in my brain just got jammed up to the maximum setting. And I could see everything with crystal clarity. I could hear every sound on a separate track. I could smell every smell. And, New York City is pretty smelly. And it was all just flooding in. And it lasted my whole walk home. I'm in New York City. So I walked home. And it was just this transcendent, awe-inspiring, almost psychedelic experience. But I thought, this is happening all the time. I'm feeling so overwhelmed by sensation, but this is happening all the time. And I'm just not paying attention to it. And I had realized I had been studying happiness for a long time. And I knew that there was some missing puzzle piece. I knew there was something that I was missing. And that walk home showed me this was the missing piece. This is what could help me engage with the world and with other people and with myself. I could do it through the five senses. And so that walk, that the awe that I felt and gratitude that I felt for my five senses and for the world around me, and that's what started me on this whole adventure.
One of the things that Gretchen and I like to do in Baja, because it's where our first campus is, with our second campus opening in March in Santa Fe, New Mexico, is do these awe walks, or I call it spying on the divine. And I will go out there with my dog, Jamie, and we'll go for a walk in a desert or in a tropical forest or, on a beach. And I just ask the question, nature, what do you have to teach me today? Mm-hmm. And it is beautiful because there's if you're willing to sort of have a question in your head or a point of view, like I want to just look for things that I've never seen before. Mm-hmm. We go back to being like 4 years old again. Mm-hmm. But I feel
that way in a city as well as in nature. Like, I love looking in the windows and just all those people and what are they doing? I like to look in, try to see what's going on in there and the stores and looking in the windows and just the design, what's happening in a big chain drugstore. I mean, I find cities just thinking about the postal service. I feel immense wonder at the postal service, which still, when I was a child, I just couldn't believe it. I still feel that way a little bit. So yes, there's all around us. Absolutely.
So talk a little bit more about how this book is different than your previous books. How many books have you written at this point?
This is my 10th book.
Your 10th book. Oh my gosh. Mm-hmm. How would you say this one is different? And what's if you were to distill down to a paragraph about the wisdom in this book, what would it be?
Well, one of the things that I discovered was, so I went into this with a hypothesis, spoiler alert, that I'd be happier if I tuned into my five senses. But what really astonished me is how this is such a flexible tool. Because for just about any aim that we have within kind of the larger subject of happiness, there's a way to tap into the five senses. So maybe, and sometimes they're even contradictory. So if you want to engage with other people, if you want to boost your creativity, if you want to evoke memories and kind of cement memories, if you want to calm down, if you want to pump up, all of these are all things that we can do through the five senses. And I think sometimes, like, when you're like, yeah, I want to appreciate the moment, but like, what does that even look like? You kind of can get stumped. But if I said, hey, how might you appreciate the moment by thinking about your five senses? It's like there's something concrete about the five senses that I think unlocks people's imagination and gets them like fired up to try things. That's what I found. It almost got ungovernable. There was so much that I wanted to try and so many things that I was excited to do, kind of in all different directions. And then I think it seems like other people feel the same way. Like, as I put these ideas into the world, so many people have given me their own ideas or their own twists. I think it's just because we know our five senses and we're interested in them, and going deeper into them is really exciting. It's very funny. Like, this only occurred to me recently as I was thinking about how this book fits into all my books. I wrote a book, Better Than Before, which was all about the 21 strategies that we can use to make or break our habits. Because if you study happiness, like as I did with the Happiness Project, you soon realize that a lot of times people know what would make them happier. They're just not doing it. Like, they know they'd be happier if they went to bed earlier, if they saw their friends more, or if they signed up for that MEA class, but they just don't do it. So why aren't they doing it? So that's what led me into habits. Of the 21 strategies, the most popular strategy is the strategy of treats. This is the idea that we need to give ourselves energy. We need to give ourselves healthy treats. If we're going to ask, we have to give more to ourselves if we're going to ask more from ourselves. And I think in a lot of ways, the five senses is a way to get that. There's something energizing, like we're inside our bodies. It gives us energy, it gives us a lift, it gives us a feeling of connection and gratitude. Like, it just lifts us up. And I think it's kind of fits into everything, where maybe you're trying to ask yourself to do something difficult. Maybe you're trying to ask yourself to give up something that's hard. And by tapping into the five senses, you can kind of refill, recharge yourself.
And are there psychological and biological benefits to doing this, to actually tapping into the senses more deeply?
Oh yeah. It's this, it seems like everything that you do, it's like, it lowers your blood pressure, it raises your immune function. It makes it easier to fall asleep faster and stay asleep. It boosts your energy. It helps you to connect with other people. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And what's your neglected sense? And talk about your neglected sense quiz. Yes. And then what's your favorite sense of your five senses?
Yeah. So, so there's if you want to know your neglected sense, you can take a quiz. It's free. It's super fun. At just GretchenRubin.com/quiz, and it will tell you your neglected sense. So as I write about in the book, like, we all have appreciated senses. These are senses where we enjoy adventures and novelty. We like to learn. We talk about it with other people. We turn to this sense for comfort and pleasure. But then we often have neglected senses. And these are senses where we don't really seek out new experiences. We don't really talk about it or try to learn about it. We don't turn to it for comfort or pleasure. We may be more aware of the negative of the sense than aware of the positive of the sense. And it's what's great about knowing your neglected sense is this is low-hanging fruit. Because your appreciated sense, you're probably already doing a lot of stuff with your appreciated sense because you appreciate it. With your neglected sense, this is something that you're not tapped into. And so if you think about, well, what could I do to bring this neglected sense more into the forefront of my attention? A lot of times there's a lot of like really fun stuff that you haven't been doing. And so what came as no surprise to me, my most neglected sense is taste.
Oh, really?
Yep. And it's a popular scent. They're all popular. And I think my most appreciated sense is smell. I love the sense of smell. And I went into this project loving the sense of smell. Yeah. How about you? If you had to guess, what do you think your neglected sense
That's a great question. Okay, so this is a really interesting question. And I'm actually gonna go to your website and take the test. Definitely not taste. I powered on a few pounds during COVID. I would say visual is probably my favorite sense, or the one that actually I use because I love art and I love nature and I love just looking at people. It's the thing that actually helps me to get out of my own brain the most, I'd say. I would say smell is the one that the olfactory is the one that I don't spend the most time. I don't spend much time on it. And having said that, I am sleeping here at my condo here in San Francisco. I'm not here very much anymore. but I have a lavender sachet under my pillow that I'm sleeping with right now. And I don't have that anywhere else, but I have it here. And I got to say that, like, in the middle of the night, when I had to go to the bathroom, I was like, man, it smells good here.
Yeah.
So I think smell is something I want to spend a little more time on to really to develop. For you, how do you know that's the one that feels the most resonant for you? Has it always been that way, or have you learned to love perfumes or certain kinds of scents?
Well, it's interesting because if anybody watching has taken the 4 tendencies quiz or knows about the 4 tendencies, which that's also at gretchenrubin.com/quiz, that's a personality framework. And I really argue with that it's consistent throughout your life. You're one at 10 and one at 50 and one at work and one at home, that it's a very consistent aspect of your nature. I think the neglected sense quiz, I think your neglected sense is something that can definitely change over time. I think in certain periods of your life, you might be really tuned into a sense or maybe backing away from a sense. So I think it's something that's fluid. So growing up and like for a lot of my adult life, I wasn't that connected to sense of smell. And I don't even remember why, but there was more and more, I began to get really into all different kinds of ways of tapping into the sense of smell. And then I knew I appreciated it because I would just look around what other people were doing. And I'm like, they don't have a giant scent collection. I have like shelves and shelves. I'm like, this is my scent collection. And I was already, even before I worked on Life in 5 Senses, I was already doing things like every time I walked through the kitchen, I would just like smell a spice jar or almond extract, which is the smell I love, or a grapefruit, or fresh towels, or like I'd go into a store. I remember saying to somebody, I love the hardware store smell. And they were like, what's a hardware store smell? I'm like, anywhere you go, a hardware store smells like a hardware store. I love that smell. And they're like, what are you talking about? So I was like, yeah, I'm tuning into this in a way that other people are not. But I don't think that that's been true my whole life. And I don't really know what helped me find my way to the sense of smell. But I encourage everybody to tap into it because it is such a source of just the most, and talk about appreciating the moment and awe. You can't bookmark it. You can't save it for later. You can't even keep appreciating it. It's only for this moment because it will fade out very quickly. So it really does tie you into the moment.
Beautiful. So you write in the book about going to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and doing that daily and using that as an opportunity to stimulate your 5 senses. Talk about your experience of each of the 5 senses and what you might experience in the Museum of Modern Art.
So it was the Metropolitan Museum, and I'm so fortunate. I live within walking distance, which I never would take for granted. I'm very interested in repetition and familiarity, and so the idea of and I'm kind of an all or nothing person. So the idea of going every day appealed to me more than going like once a week or a few times a week. And when I started, I thought this was very idiosyncratic, but it turns out a lot. I'd be curious of the people watching. Like, do you also have this impulse to do the same thing every day? Because there's a kind of understanding and observation that you can do through like such frequent encounters. So, you talk people who do forest bathing will sometimes always go back to the same sit spot, or like people walking their dog will do exactly the same walk because they want to sort of watch a certain group of trees change throughout the time, or I know a guy taking a picture of a sunrise every morning from like a very particular view. I think for some people that's very appealing. Other people are like, the world is full of variety. Why would you limit yourself to one place? And I think, okay, for you, that's right. But some of us like the repetition. And it's really true. I mean, when the museum is so vast, and the way that I have understood it and encountered it just has changed so dramatically as I've been over, so many times. And even now, there's things that are so obvious that I'm only now noticing or having people point out to me. It just feels it is limitless. It's a limitless, because the year that I spent doing it, that's over long ago. But I feel like I'm going to be visiting the Met every day for the rest of my life because I love it so much, and it gets more interesting, not less interesting.
So I think part of the idea of noticing things you hadn't noticed before is it feels like the sense of discovery especially when your eyes are not fresh, but they're like, you've seen it before, but now you're seeing it in a new way.
Ah, the best feeling.
Right. Especially with pieces of art too. I'm like, oh my
Yes.
God, I've never seen it that way. And
Yes.
so talk about that if you don't mind.
Oh, I mean, it's absolutely true. And that's part of what I love is like the museum only becomes more and more alive as I add layer and layer and layer of meaning of it. Okay, so here's a fun example. I don't know if you saw this book. It's called All the Beauty in the World. It's by Patrick Bingley. Great guy.
Yes.
He worked as a museum guard for 10 years
Yeah.
and he wrote a memoir about it. So of course we have to connect because, you know, we're both, you know, these big Met writers. So we go walk around and he's like, he points out to me the guard mark. So if you look at the Met in certain places against the wall, there's like a dark line, almost like if you had, you know, if you have a door jamb where everybody's fingers are, it just gets darkened. The guard mark is because that's where guards will lean up against it with their dark jackets. And over decades, they leave a guard mark. And when you know to look for it, it's like as you come up the grand staircase, you know, that everybody has seen inside, you see the guard marks right there. And I'm like, I have walked by this wall how many times?
Yeah.
And I never noticed this extremely conspicuous mark. But now now I'll always see it. And I'll remember the time when I visited with Patrick and Patrick said, oh, there's a guard mark and there's a name for it. And same thing with pieces of art. People are like, oh, this is my favorite piece. And then I'm like, oh, or what I love is like, if something's mentioned in a novel or something, I'll go look for it. Like I just read Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel, and she mentions a painting in the Met. So I went to go look at it. I've walked by that painting 100 times and I've noticed it, but I never really looked at it the way I'm going to look at it now, because she's pointed it out to me in a new way. And I love that feeling.
It feels like if there's a summary here, and then I'm going to go back to one more question around happiness and aging. So for people who are interested in raising your hand, this is the time to do it. Just go down to the bottom and go under reactions and you'll see you can raise your hand there and we will call on you. It feels like one of the key things that I took from your book and from just this conversation so far is, you know, when we tap into our senses and when we actually, the beauty of being able to tap into our senses is it helps us to flee the ghetto of our mind, especially the mind loop. So maybe one of the best things for us to do if we're going through anxiety or if we're going through, you know, regret and we're just like, it's on the doom loop is to actually try to tap into our senses as the guide for you out of that ghetto of anxiety or the mind or your ego or whatever it is. And your senses are like these Sherpas, sensory Sherpas. There we go. You know, Chip loves his alliteration. A sensory Sherpa that helps you get to a better place. Does that sound right?
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of the five senses is they both take you out of yourself and bring you back into yourself. So it does both things at the same time. And one of the things I really love is I think some people want to do this in a very the kind of what you described in sort of a disciplined way. So maybe like through something like meditation. Which is wonderful. I myself have never been able to find meditation a useful tool, but I know that many people do. But so there's like a disciplined way to do it. And so you might do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 meditation, or you might really sit and really experience a cup of coffee in a very kind of disciplined way. That's wonderful. But there's also kind of like a playful recess. Let your mind off the leash, like let yourself have a break, like just get out in the world, experience it. And that also can bring you out, but then also bring you back to yourself. And so for me, like, that's one of the reasons that I went to the Met every day. It's like, for me, it was recess. I wasn't trying to achieve anything in particular. I tried to have as few rules as possible because I do love rules. So I tried to like make it like, there's no rules. I could just do whatever I feel like, long or short. I could do whatever I want. And so there's like a playfulness to the five senses that I think sometimes people, they're like, everything that I'm trying to do is sort of effortful. And it's like, it can be effortful if that feels what's like missing or what's appropriate. But there's also just the pure delight of it, just the fun of it, the creativity of it, just the excitement of it. And I feel like that the five senses can supply that in a really, in an extremely like concrete, available way. You don't need to make an appointment or buy some equipment or learn how to do something. Just have fun with it.
Beautiful. So let's wrap this part of our conversation before we go to questions from the audience. And for those who have questions, go ahead and raise your hand. And there are also some questions in the meeting chat that I'm going to ask based upon what people have been asking. Talk about happiness as we age. There's something called the U curve of happiness, social science research that helps people to understand that on average, your mileage may vary. Around 45 to 50 or early 50s is the low point in life satisfaction during adulthood. There's a lot of reasons for that. And then with each passing decade, starting in our 50s, we get happier and happier. Any thoughts on the U curve of happiness? Any thoughts on what makes for happiness as we age?
I think it's, if you had to pick one thing, it would be relationships. I think throughout our lives, it's really relationships. And it's one of the great challenges with every period of our life, which is how do we maintain relationships and build on relationships? And, it's like make new friends and keep the old, so you need to keep your friends strong. One of the things research shows is that people benefit from having friends who are both older than they are and younger than they are. This can sometimes be a challenge if you're not in a place where you're meeting a lot of people who aren't your age. So it's something to really seek out and cultivate to maintain relationships. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the negatives of social media and technology, and those are certainly true. But I do think that one of the very powerful, and every medicine can become poison, but I do think that it has lowered the bar for a lot of different kinds of social engagement and over time that I think it can be really, really valuable if we use it in the right way, if we use it mindfully. So I think that's something to really think about. Yes, if I had to say, I think that when you look at the people who are the happiest, it's the ones who really do have strong, intimate, enduring bonds with others, where they feel like they can get support, and also just for happiness is give support, where they feel like they can confide, where they feel like they belong. And so I think that is the thing that you see throughout our lives, and certainly as we age.
And Dr. Robert Bob Waldinger from Harvard, his research and around the 85-year-long longitudinal study on adult development has shown exactly that. In fact, he's going to be, spoiler alert, on August 1st, he's going to be with us in a program like this because of his new book, The Good Life. He basically showed that people who are in their early 80s, the number one variable for understanding someone who's happy, healthy, and still living in their early 80s is not their cholesterol level, their level of stress, their heredity around their health, but it's actually how invested were they in their social relations at age 50. So it totally matches with what you're saying. Thank you, Gretchen. Let's actually go to Janet with a question. Janet, thank you for being here.
Hey, hi. I was influenced by author Barry Lopez, especially his book River Notes, where he took a walk every day in the same place where he lived on the river and studied the natural history, the human political history, all kinds of, he went into everything, every possible thing you could study about that tiny little stretch of river. And it changed the way I went about walking up my hill and walking back down my little hill. It's like I started noticing this succession of different spider webs. Each week, a different spider would have a different patterned web. And oh my goodness. So I feel right in line with what you're saying.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's the more we know, the more we notice. So as you bring more to something, you get more from it. But it's true, like somebody might be like, what's so boring? It's so boring to do the same walk. And you're like, are you kidding? I have to watch the spider webs. There could be a new one today. So yeah,
exactly.
It becomes very exciting with repetition. Yeah, what a beautiful.
If
I haven't read that book. I'm gonna look at it.
If anybody's stumped about that process, so look up Barry Lopez.
Beautiful.
I'm writing that down.
Thank you, Janet. Here's a question from Bonnie. She's curious about your thoughts around how overactivation of one of the five senses or too much activation of more than one can trigger a stress response or a trauma trigger. So in other words, for some of us, part of the reason we want to get into our senses is to get out of our brain. And then for others, people may find that the senses are overwhelm them. And what do you suggest for that?
Well, this is why it's really important to really know yourself and to think about like how you want to shape your sensory surroundings. And I think, at least for me, I was far too passive about allowing sensations that I didn't like or that were distracting me, instead of saying like, well, what can I do to shape my sensory surroundings? One of the things I realized about myself, and I was doing this sort of unconsciously, was that if I'm very stressed out, I will start to lower sensory stimulation generally. So if I walk into the kitchen and my husband's playing music, I'll turn it off. I usually wear perfume to bed because I love perfume. But if I'm very stressed out, I'll stop wearing perfume. If I'm reading a book, I'll often reread a book. I mean, not that that's so sensory, but I'm trying to bring down stimulation. But I've heard from people where when they're really stressed out, they pump it up. They take a really hot shower or a really cold shower, or they eat something very spicy, or they play music very loud, or they hold an ice cube in their mouth or bite into a lemon, and they find that calms them. And so it's really about thinking about yourself and like, how can I shape my sensory surroundings to get me to where I want to be? And maybe I'm tapping into a neglected sense. So how can maybe I don't think about touch. Are there ways that I can harness touch to give myself calm and security? Or do you want to tap into one of your appreciated senses and think, okay, how can I use music? I love the sense of hearing. How can I use music to help evoke a mood that I want to cultivate? So I think it's very, very important. And I think this is why something we have to think about how different other people are from us. Just because something's fine for me doesn't mean it's fine for you. People are really different. We have to show a lot of compassion and create environments where everybody can thrive. This is why I think something like an open office plan is a real challenge, because some people want music to be playing and some people want it to be quiet, and some people want there to be a lot of visual stimulation and a lot of people want none, and some people don't care if the fridge is stinky, and other people are like, oh my gosh, you can't eat an egg salad sandwich in public. We have all these different things and we have to work it out to create an environment where we can all thrive if we're sharing a space, or just with yourself to think about what works for you. It's a very important point.
The open office plans are so open these days with remote work that, man, you can, there aren't a lot of people there. A few people have asked questions around losing a sense of sight or smell, or, what did you do any research on what happens when a person loses one of their senses? And does that mean other senses are more stimulated as a result of that? Or and especially for those as they get older with their eyesight, any thoughts on what you do to overcompensate for a sense that's actually sort of falling apart?
Right. Well, it is true. And as we age, a lot of the senses, certainly the sense of sight, hearing, loss of hearing is very associated with aging. Often things don't taste as much, and that's because it's actually your sense of smell that's probably being affected, because it's smell and taste together that give us flavor, and often we lose some of our sense of smell with age. And so sometimes people think that if you lose one sense, the others are like actually heightened. They aren't actually heightened. We just become much more sophisticated in using them. So something like echolocation is something that just about anybody can learn to do, but we don't, because we rely on our sight. But that's something that for people who lose their sense of sight, they can start to tap in to that human ability to do echolocation. And this is something that of course many people face, and of course you can have a rich, meaningful life even if you lose some of your senses. And it's interesting also the role that technology is playing in trying to create new forms of support and assistance for people who are having a sense that's affected. It's something that many of us face and need to think about. I mean, one thing I would say is that Chip, I'm sure you know about this research, that if your sense of hearing is affected, you really, there is just a lot of research showing that you are very much benefited from having hearing aids, that not being able to communicate with other people effectively is something that really, really does in the long term affect people's health and happiness. And so if you're thinking, oh, do I really need to deal with it? There's a lot of research showing that you probably would get a very big benefit from addressing that.
Beautiful. Thank you. The question came up in the chat. And again, if people would like to raise their hand, you're welcome to ask the question directly to Gretchen. Otherwise, I'll continue to ask some of these. What about the sixth sense? You focus on the five senses. Is there such a thing as a sixth sense? Of course, we tend to think of that as intuition or instinct. Obviously, this is sort of like a completely different part of the lexicon around senses. Do you have any thoughts on that, or has anybody asked you questions around a sixth sense?
Well, it's funny because scientists would actually say that we probably have 33 or 35 senses. So it's not just six, it goes way up.
Okay.
But for this book, I thought about, well, do I want to talk about something like proprioception? And I realized, there really is a glamour to the big five, what you could
wait, what did you just call that? Proprioception?
Proprioception. There are all kinds of senses that we have.
What is that?
That's a sense of our bodies in space.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, these senses are more akin to something like breathing, where if something goes wrong, we're very aware of it, and it's very essential to our sense of well-being and our making our way through the world, but we're really not that aware of it unless something goes wrong. But the big five, what you could call the kindergarten senses, or you could call them the Aristotelian senses, we're very aware of those. We're very tapped into those. So I thought, well, those are the ones that I want to study. So the sixth sense, intuition, no, I didn't study that. I was really focused on kind of the big five, the ones that really are very much located. It's funny, they're very located on the head. Even touch, which is throughout the body, is got a lot of touch in our mouths and our lips and our tongue. So, but yeah, so I would consider the sixth sense the sensorium, which is all five senses working together.
That sounds I want to go to the sensorium, mommy.
I know, right?
Mommy, take me to the sensorium. It sounds pretty
I know.
amazing.
Yeah, the sensorium exploratorium. Yeah,
exactly. We have Isabella. Hello, Isabella. It's great to see you. Isabella was down in Baja a few months ago, and at one of our workshops. What's your question, Isabella?
My question, thank you for this discussion. This is really fun and so informative. And so my question is, if you found any interesting cultural differences in experiences of senses, whether it's in, I know a bit about different indigenous communities or different kinds of just different cultures, and that they are more or less, focused on some senses or have practices that help us focus on some senses versus others. Did you find anything interesting that might be just a fun thing to learn about around cultural differences?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many interesting cultural differences, and you're right. Like in some cultures, like the sense of smell, which is traditionally in the West, sense of smell has been considered kind of like a bonus sense, or kind of like it's nice to have. I think because of COVID, people are much more aware of like the very vital role that sense plays. But in other cultures, sense is much more part of the conversation and what they're focused on. There are interesting differences even in like seeing color. In English, we have pink and red. But in Russian, they have that for blue. They have two colors of blue. And if you have two colors of that, you're actually quicker in sorting colors because you have a word associated for it. So, the way that you divide up the spectrum and the way that you talk about color is culturally determined. When it comes to cuisine, of course, there's very, very different cultures related to taste. Just to take, and the way that this covers with the sense of touch is that in some cultures, they have a much wider range of the kind of textures that they enjoy. Say in many Asian cuisines, there are many, many more textures than say like in the United States, we would enjoy. And so they actually, have a bigger range of things that they like. So it's really, and then one thing that is very interesting is with smells, because some people will say like, well, lavender is relaxing. These are associations that we learn through culture. Like we are born like resisting bitter because it's often associated with toxins, and we like sweet because it's often associated with nutrition. But nature doesn't have killer smells, so we really don't have those kinds of associations. The associations that we have are cultural. So people in Brazil think that lavender is energizing because that's what they learned. So So even kind of what smells good, what smells bad. I think this is hilarious. The Department of Defense tried to create a stink bomb because they were like, oh, this would be a great way to dissipate crowds, right? You just drop something that smells so bad that people run away. It'd be very safe. But they found that it's very, very hard to find a universal stink because what people think smells bad is just very different across the globe. And so this idea that like everybody hates this one smell, it wasn't that easy to find. In the end, they did find something, but you'd think, oh, well, you just make something that just smells really bad. It's like, it's hard. People have different views about good and bad smells across the world. So it's very, very fascinating to think about.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. You are a fountain of information. I just want to know, when is the Gretchen Aroma Tour of Paris happening?
Ooh, I would love to do that. I have been to the perfume museum in Paris. I love it. There are so many beautiful smells in Paris. Yes, I'm there. Tell me when. I will lead or I will follow. I would love to be. I would love to be in it on that tour in any role.
Yes. Kimberly Charles, hi Kimberly. It's great to see this question from you. This is actually directed to me, and it maybe is a good bridge for Gretchen and I to talk a little bit about MEA. By the way, for those who want to actually sign up and learn more about MEA, whether it's our online workshops, online courses, or our in-person workshops, or our sabbatical sessions, our wellness vacations down in Baja, you can sign up and on the website, or you can there we go. Connor just put in the more information right there in the chat. So Kimberly asked the question about so how do we deal with intergenerational collaboration issues, and the fact that often if you are someone who's getting older in a workplace that's getting younger, people don't want to listen to you. There's the okay boomer phenomena. I don't want to hear it. So I would just say, Kimberly, that a few things. Number one is the modern workplace is a generational potluck. We have 5 generations in the workplace for the first time. Here's a stat that a lot of people don't know. By the year 2025, the majority of Americans will have a younger boss. Wow, that has never happened. We have never had an era in the workplace where most people were reporting to someone younger than them. When I had a boutique hotel company for 24 years, Joie de Vivre, created 52 boutique hotels, sold it in the Great Recession. And then I ended up reporting to Brian Chesky at Airbnb, but I was mentoring him. So I was mentoring my boss who was 21 years younger than me. I'd say the 2 key things to know for those of us who are, older than the people around us, is number one is show up with curiosity. Don't show out. The last thing people want to hear is back in my day. Here's how we did it. Now, it doesn't mean you can't actually talk about some of your lived experience. Wisdom is really about your painful life lessons that have now become the raw material for your future wisdom. So it's really about taking some of that metabolized experience and making it relevant to other people. But don't tell people how the world works. So be curious, be open to learning. It's really, really important. And more than anything, just learn respect on both sides. If you're younger, respect that older person because they have some life lessons that you might learn from. But if you're the older person, learn from the younger person because they have something to teach you as well. My relationship with Brian was very much a relationship that was symbiotic. I taught him EQ, emotional intelligence, and he taught me DQ, digital intelligence, and we were both better off for it. What is your perspective in terms of you're in your mid to later 50s, Gretchen? I just outed you. And do you have a point of view on how you see your next 20 or 30 years? And how are you going to leverage yourself and the wisdom you've developed over time? Do you think that's going to influence the kind of books you write, or how you're going to live your career? How do you see your next 20 years?
One of the things that's odd is I feel like I'm just starting. I still feel like, wow, this is all new. I mean, earlier you said how many books have I written, and it's just sort of staggering to me because I feel like this is still new. I realized the other day that I have lived in this apartment in New York City longer than I lived in Kansas City growing up. And it blew my mind because it all feels new. And I don't, and maybe in part that's bad because it's not new. And so I want to like be present where I am in my life, but I still feel this sense of excitement. Like with each new book, it just feels like this is all new. This is my first time. This whole section of the library is lighting up the way it never had before. I'm going to have to figure it all out all over again. And that feels exciting. But I do feel like, you know, as I move forward, I'm learning, I am learning, I'm mapping out different parts of human nature and seeing it with different clarity. But to your point about like digital, you know, the tools that we can use to connect with readers and listeners just change all the time. I find that immensely satisfying, and I feel like the world is my research assistant. I get so many like great resources and suggestions and observations from my readers and listeners. So I really feel that that's hugely exciting to use these tools, but they take a lot of effort to understand how to use them well. So I do feel like feeling like you're still curious is I still do feel very, very curious and very, very eager to be the student. And so that's how I think about it. Yeah, kind of step by step.
I love that. There's so much evidence of this, that the curiosity, two of the most correlated variables to living a long, healthy life are curiosity and openness to new experiences. And one of the challenges that we have, oh, someone liked that. Anna Corbett liked that. So the reason for that is partly because it takes us out of the fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And this is some of the curriculum we have down in Baja and in our online programs. When you have a fixed mindset, you tend to focus on proving yourself and winning. And when you have a growth mindset, you tend to focus on improving yourself and learning. And Gretchen, you are such a great example of a growth mindset, constantly being curious, wanting to learn something new, being open to being a beginner again. And because of that, what we tend to do when we go to that place, we are less judgmental of ourselves, less critical of ourselves, and more open to having some fun along the way as well. Because, you know, learning and laughter have something to do with each other as well. So I just want to, as we wrap up here, I just want to say thank you. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and for being part of our series here. And your book's spectacular. All of your books are. Your website is also spectacular. So for those of you who have not spent time on Gretchen's website, so much good information, so much generosity of free information and free quizzes that she offers. Is there any last thought you want to offer to the group, Gretchen?
Just that I do think that if you're feeling stuck in your head or sluggish or restless, that there is just so much beauty waiting on the five senses. I really encourage everybody to think about, you know, even just the smallest things, to think about how to bring the five senses into the foreground of your attention. And Chip, thank you so much for this conversation. I feel like we could talk all day. We're interested in so many of the same things. And as you know, I'm such a longtime admirer of your work. It's really an honor to get a chance to have a conversation with you.
Thank you. And some of your friends have been teachers at MEA.
Indeed, they have. Yes.
And they have sung our praises, which we very much appreciate. We appreciate all of you in our community, and so many of you who are actually going to watch the recorded version of this. Thank you. You are part of the reason that MEA exists, is because you tell your friends. So tell your friends about MEA, and absolutely tell your friends about Gretchen's new book, Life in 5 Senses. Thanks, everybody.
Oh, thank you, Chip.
Thanks.
Thank you, Gretchen. You will be able to watch the recording of this on our YouTube channel. Everybody who registered will get an email from us. So let's put it up. Take yourselves off of mute and say thank you to Gretchen and Chip yourself as we take you out. And thank you for coming. Go ahead. Go.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Sensory overload. Sensory overload.
Sensory overload.
All in the best way, best possible way.
It's all love.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Abundantly.
And hi, Martha Rock.